Okay, so as Jessica said, I am Britt Burner, and I'm here to talk about Medicaid in the time of COVID-19. I think it's important to just give some information out about what has been going on in Medicaid. I'm going to mix some of the regulations that have come out and what we've seen in writing and some real life experience that we've been having with our clients. As always, we are going to cover always New York topics, but specifically our clients are in the 5 boroughs, Nassau and Suffolk County for the most part. So while a lot of this is statewide, as always with Medicaid, it is different county by county in how the things are implemented and what actually happens. So we're going to go through some of those things. As Jessica said, feel free to put your Q&A down at the bottom and we'll get going. We have some questions already. Okay, we're going to wait and get to those in a second. So first of all, the first thing I want to comment on are some things that are federal in nature that affect us locally, statewide, and countywide in Medicaid. One is the stimulus check. We've gotten a lot of people who have contacted us and asked us if that stimulus check is income, if they're in a nursing home. And just to recap, if you are in a nursing home receiving nursing home, which we call chronic or institutional Medicaid, then your income goes to the facility. Of course, everybody's case is a little different if they're spouses, et cetera, but for the most part, income will go to the facility and Medicaid will pay the balance. So is that stimulus check income? Does it need to go to the facility? The answer is no. It is not income, and therefore it doesn't get budgeted as such for a Medicaid recipient. What that means for a home care recipient is that that is not a deposit that needs to be added to your pooled income trust every month. So what I'm talking about there is for those who are on home care Medicaid who have income over $895 a month, they need to deposit their surplus income into a pooled income trust in order to continue to use it to pay for their household bills. In that case, when income comes in, any income over the allowable amount will go to the pool trust, but because this stimulus check is not counted as income, it does not need to go into the pooled income trust. It also, I want to point out that, so usually, let's say you get $100 worth of income in a given month from a pension. In that first month that you're receiving it, so when I receive that check on June 2nd, that is income. If it stays in my bank account until July 1st, until the turnover of the calendar month, then in July, that $100, if not spent, reverts to being a resource. So that is an asset. So it's an income in the month I receive it, but then it becomes an asset. With the stimulus check, it is not a countable resource until after 12 months. So it's a really great thing that was done with the stimulus check because it's giving people income that is not going to get in the way of their government benefits. And it's also not going to turn over to be an asset or a resource immediately in the following month, like a regular source of income would. And so that's a really great thing. And that was done through the CARES Act. The other federal item that a lot of people have been asking us about is the IRA distribution. So the federal government has said that people do not need to take the required minimum distributions from their retirement accounts that they would otherwise need to take for 2020. But Medicaid does not have the same rule. The Medicaid rule is that you must take that income. Now, in the 5 boroughs, we're talking about your required minimum distribution. That's the amount you have to take. In other counties, the distribution that has to be taken from a retirement account is a higher amount based on a different life expectancy table. But in either case, the suspension of the requirement to take that amount is not a Medicaid rule, it's an IRS rule. And so if you are a recipient of Medicaid services, you still need to be taking distributions from that retirement account in order for it to be in payout status, which allows you to receive your Medicaid services. So again, if you're in a nursing home, that's a piece of income that is then contributed to the nursing home. And if you are on home care, that is a piece of income that will contribute to the amount that needs to go to the pooled income trust if you are over the allowable limits. One of the questions that has been written in is, what are the income levels for community Medicaid? For 2020, it's $895 a month. The question was, what is it in 2019? And I would have to go back and look at that. And I see the person who asked the question has my email address, so you can email us and ask that, and I will answer that question. I just don't remember off the top of my head. I want to say it was, it's only gone up a small amount, but I don't remember the 2019 number. Okay, so next we're going to talk about actually applying for and keeping your Medicaid. So Medicaid is up and running. And something I never would have really guessed is that we seem to be getting very quick responses when applying for Medicaid. And that's true in the city as well as out on Long Island. We found that the program has been responding quickly to people. I think they're processing very efficiently. So that's really good news. A lot of the submissions can be done by fax now. They don't want as much paper. And certainly in New York City, they've actually listed and issued an entire list of different fax numbers of how you can submit different types of applications depending on what you're applying for. And so they're really trying to streamline it to make things more efficient. So we can only hope that these are things that are going to be positives that carry over. I think we've all learned in our personal lives as well as our work lives that there are some positive things that have come from trying to work from home, trying to work differently and still be efficient during COVID. And we're hoping that this is one of the things that remains efficient as things move forward. Another thing that they've allowed during COVID, which will continue during the COVID state of emergency for the state, is that you can attest to all of the requirements of a new application, except for your identity and immigration status. So what does that mean? Well, if Medicaid says I'm allowed to have $15,750 in my bank account, but I'm stuck at home on COVID, being safe, staying home, and I can't get a copy of that statement, I can attest to Medicaid that I have less than the Medicaid limit. I can attest to Medicaid that if I have to give a 5-year look back for a nursing home, that I didn't transfer anything that would create a penalty period. I can attest to that. I can swear in an attestation that that's true. But you have to be really careful, because that attestation doesn't mean we can lie to Medicaid. It doesn't mean that we can tell them something that we don't know the answer to. So if you truly know that you haven't transferred any assets over the past 5 years, then you should feel comfortable attesting. But if you're not sure and you really do need to look at all those statements to do so, I wouldn't recommend attesting to the fact that you didn't make transfers, because Medicaid could always come back and ask for that information down the line once the state of emergency is over. And you don't want it to be that it was Medicaid wrongly paid if you're approved under this attestation, because then you've told Medicaid something that isn't true. And you don't want then to owe back the Medicaid program because you were offering up information that wasn't true and it was a fraud on the program. So you really want to be careful with this attestation. It's a great thing, but you don't want to get stuck where you're attesting to something that you're not sure of. The other thing I want to point out about the attestation is the part I said about you can't attest to identity or immigration status. So you are going to have to show identification to show who you are, that you are who you say you are, and that you are legally in the United States and what your immigration status is. And that's information that you're going to need to provide. So they're not waiving that requirement. And the other thing that they're waiving is that you used to have to show that if you weren't yet receiving If you had applied for your Medicare benefits, but you didn't get it yet, you don't have to show that application to show that you had applied. Usually when you're applying for Medicaid, which is a health insurance program, you have to show that you've applied for the other health insurances that can be afforded to you, because Medicaid is the payer of last resort. So they're waiving that you have to show that requirement. You have to show that you've applied. The other thing that they're waiving, and this mostly applies on Long Island more than it does in the city, is that on Long Island, when you apply for home care Medicaid especially, they want you to swear that you have applied for VA benefits, the aid and attendance pension. Even if you know that if you apply, you're not going to be eligible because of the look back or whatever it is that there are for VA benefits, they want proof. They want that application to prove that you applied, but you no longer during the COVID emergency need to provide that proof. For recertifications, so they're saying that cases will not be closed due to a failure to recertify, and that if you fail to recertify, that you will be extended for 12 months. Now, in Suffolk County, for example, they're actually proactively sending out notices to people saying that they have been renewed, and that's working in Suffolk. However, in the city, they're not sending those notices. So a lot of people, and we've been advising a lot of people to keep recertifying, because we want to avoid any issue if they can recertify, especially being able to attest to some of the assets. If they can recertify, we want to avoid the issue of their Medicaid being cut off, even if it's wrongly being cut off, because we all know that once your Medicaid's discontinued, to get it back up and running can be difficult. And so we really want people to make sure that they maintain their coverage. In New York City, specifically, a few weeks ago, they had sent out a bunch of letters that mistakenly told people that due to a failure to recertify, their case would be discontinued. This was actually a massive glitch in their system. They admitted to this. They say that people don't have to file fair hearings if they received that notice, and that it will be fixed internally. However, a lot of advocates still believe that clients should be filing fair hearings in those cases, just to make sure, again, that the benefits aren't being cut off. These kinds of things are something that are done on a case-by-case basis, and you should really speak to whoever your advocate is, whether it's an attorney or a social worker, or whoever it is that assists you with gaining and maintaining your Medicaid benefits, to figure out where you fall in this recertification situation. But you want to make sure that you don't have any interruption in services. Most importantly, we want to remind you that anytime you receive a notice from Medicaid, whether it's the Department of Social Services of your local county on Long Island, or HRA, the Human Resources Administration in the 5 boroughs, you want to reply to all notices. You don't want any notices to go unlooked at, unanswered. You want to be getting advice on those notices if you aren't going to be applying, because again, you want to make sure that there is no discontinuation of services, because it's very hard to get somebody on the phone. Certainly at HRA in the city, I know on a specific case, I called the surplus unit to talk about a payment that my client had to make. And I received a call back about 4.5 weeks later saying, you left a message on this voicemail, how can we help you? Now, it was 4.5 weeks later, I had gotten very creative and found a different way to solve the client's problem, but they couldn't even tell me what the client's name was that I had called about. And so we have a lot of clients, and I had actually called on 3 different cases, and I didn't know what I was getting the call back for. And I asked the woman how she got my information. She said, I was given a list of people to call and said, please call them back. Now, I think that the idea is that had I been the Medicaid consumer myself, I obviously would have known that they were calling about my own case, but she didn't have any details about my situation. She only had my name and phone number and was told to call and ask me if I had any surplus issues. So you really want to avoid those cases where we have to get in touch with someone because they're not working on a full staff at all times. There are people working, from my understanding, on kind of an A team and a B team where they're taking turns in the office. Another thing to talk about are the assessments. So once you get this financial approval, you've submitted your application by fax, they've gotten back to you, whether it was immediate need for a faster expedited review or otherwise the regular role, you need to have nursing assessments. So first of all, if there's a physician's order required, so if you're applying for immediate need Medicaid, you need to have an order filled out by the physician. In the city, it's called an M11Q. On Long Island, they have their own form. And this form traditionally needs to be signed by the doctor, and the doctor has to say that they saw you within 30 days of it being submitted, and that the document was signed within 30 days of being submitted. Now, with COVID, they're allowing for those visits with the doctor to be by telehealth. And so that's been really helpful for people because they don't have to get out and get to the doctor's office. They can get those forms filled out by telehealth. The other thing that's being done by telehealth and being done with video conferencing and phone are the actual nursing assessments. So once you have your approval that says, yes, you can go forward, now you are financially approved, the nursing assessment to determine how many hours of care you're going to need for immediate need Medicaid can be done by the Department of Social Services nurse via telehealth. And same for those enrolling in a managed long-term care plan, the assessment that is the conflict-free assessment to determine that you are a person who is in need of services for more than 120 days, which is what is required for managed long-term care Medicaid. That assessment can also be done by telehealth, as can the assessment with the individual managed long-term care plans to determine the amount of hours of care that Medicaid will be providing. And so that's been really helpful for people during COVID, again, not to have strangers coming into their home, and safer for the nurses who are working for HRA and for the managed long-term care plans and the CASAs and the Department of Social Services, that these nurses don't need to go into all these different people's homes. And so that's been really helpful. And again, it's something that'll be interesting to see post-COVID, what happens? How are we going to be incorporating telehealth into our Medicaid world? And that's something that I think will be interesting to see how we adapt in that way after this time. The reassessments of the level of care have been suspended. So it has been traditionally in the law that every 6 months somebody is supposed to be reassessed and their care plan looked at by the managed long-term care plan. This has been halted. That does not have to happen at this time. You'll continue with the plan of care. If you're asking for an increase in hours of care, that reassessment is also something that can be done by telehealth. Again, because we're trying to protect not just the Medicaid consumer, but also the nurses who work for the Medicaid program and the plans who don't want to go into all these different people's houses and create a larger problem. The other thing that happened during COVID, and I think this is going to be left as a topic for another webinar, but I would be remiss to not mention it, is that in April, when the fiscal year 2020/2021 budget was approved, there were many changes made to the Medicaid program. Two main changes are that there is a 2.5-year look back that will be opposed for new Medicaid applications filed after October 1st of 2020. So that's, they will go back 2.5 years and see what transfers were made, and any transfers made that were uncompensated, just like for a nursing home, will now create a penalty period for home care Medicaid. So that's a very big change. There are also changes coming to the assessment tools to determine how many hours of care somebody can receive and if they are appropriate for long-term care Medicaid. And those changes are set to be effective October 1st, 2020. Now, however, because of the COVID emergency, The new law actually states that the Director of Budget of New York State has the ability to delay the start date or delay the effective date of those changes for up to 90 days if we are still in a state of emergency in New York State. And so we are watching this very closely because, one, we're trying to determine what this is actually going to look like to have this new process by which we look at home care Medicaid applications. And then beyond that, what will the effective date be and what is that? So again, that's something that's going to be a topic of a future webinar that we are going to do as some of the issues become a little bit clearer. And we'll probably have to have a few webinars on that, because what I imagine is that there is the facts of how things stand right now, but there's a lot of advocacy going on about the start date and how this is going to be implemented. And so I think that we'll have updates as time goes by. And they may be quick 5-minute or 10-minute updates, but we'll make sure that we're bringing that to you. And we're also posting on our newsletter and on our website articles about that as it's happening. Are there any questions at this time? Okay, I don't think we have any questions. That's all the content I have for you guys today. I'm glad you joined us. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you again soon. Have a nice day.